My parents actually handed me a bill for being raised. I stared at the number, completely frozen. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. It all started on a quiet Sunday afternoon. My parents, Roy and Marlene, called a family meeting. My younger brother Toby sat across from me, smirking as if he already knew the punchline. I had no idea what was coming. Roy slammed a folded paper onto the table. "You owe us for raising you," he said, his voice calm but final. Marlene nodded, her lips tight. I unfolded the paper and stared. It was a detailed list: food, clothes, school fees, even birthday gifts. Everything I had ever needed as a child now had a price tag. I felt my stomach drop. "This is insane," I whispered. "I didn't ask to be born to be charged for my life." Toby laughed, and Marlene rolled her eyes. "You think you know responsibility? You're lucky we raised you at all," she said. Their words cut deeper than I ever imagined. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally were treating me like a transaction. I left that house with my hands shaking, my heart heavy with betrayal. For years, I had believed that love was unconditional in my family. I was wrong. Every sacrifice I made for myself, every quiet struggle to get through school and work, meant nothing to them. Only the numbers on that bill mattered. For weeks, I replayed that moment in my head. I realized I couldn't stay under their control, couldn't let their greed define me. I needed to live my life on my terms and show them that I was stronger than they thought. I moved into a small apartment, started working extra hours, and focused on building a life that was completely mine. I found a career I loved and invested my earnings wisely. I stayed polite with my family, but kept them at a distance. Every promotion, every milestone, every small victory reminded me that I didn't need them to survive or to thrive. Years later, I returned to a family gathering, composed and confident. I quietly revealed my success: a stable career, financial independence, and a life filled with people who truly valued me. My parents' jaws dropped. Toby looked stunned, speechless. I didn't shout or accuse. I just smiled and said, "I've paid my own way. You were never owed anything." The silence in the room was heavy, filled with realization. For the first time, they understood that their attempts to control me had failed. Walking away, I felt a sense of freedom I had never known. The anger, the betrayal, and the hurt were still there, but they were mine to control now. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my self-worth. And in the end, I was richer than they could ever imagine, not in money, but in freedom and peace. Growing up, my life felt more like a ledger than a childhood. My parents, Roy and Marlene, had rules for everything. Love wasn't freely given. It had to be earned, and often it came with conditions I couldn't meet. If I got a B instead of an A, or forgot to thank them properly at dinner, I felt their disappointment like a cold weight pressing down on me. Money and obligations were their language of care. Every chore I did, every hour I spent studying, they tracked in their minds, as if I was building a debt I would owe them forever. My achievements were rarely celebrated. My failures, no matter how small, were reminders that nothing was free. They taught me that family wasn't about support or encouragement. It was about who owed what, and when the balance might tip. Toby, my younger brother, thrived in their system. He made even minor accomplishments seem monumental, and my parents never missed a chance to praise him. A perfect test score, a sports trophy, a polite gesture. They hung his success on the wall like decorations. I watched, often in silence, as the same efforts I poured into my work were dismissed or ignored. It created a quiet anger inside me, a mix of envy and frustration I didn't know how to express. Despite their focus on money and control, I learned to navigate the gaps on my own. College wasn't just an opportunity to learn. It was a place where I could quietly prove myself outside their judgment. I took odd jobs, tutoring, and weekend shifts, keeping my finances separate so I could support myself without needing their approval. I didn't tell them about my scholarships, my savings, or the late nights spent making sure my rent and bills were covered. It wasn't pride, it was strategy. I knew if they discovered the truth, it would only trigger greed and attempts to claim what they thought was owed. I kept my achievements invisible, folding my victories into the background like quiet victories no one could touch. Each success was mine alone, shielded from the household that measured value in obedience and money. I learned to smile politely when they boasted about Toby, nodding and saying the right words while hiding the satisfaction I felt in my own progress. Their approval was never the goal. It was my independence that mattered. Looking back, those years shaped the person I became: careful, determined, and quietly resilient. I learned to thrive without recognition, to invest in myself when no one else would, and to find pride in accomplishments that weren't validated by conditional love. Every sacrifice they ignored, every expectation they placed on me, only strengthened my resolve to create a life that truly belonged to me. By the time I left for the wider world, I was already building a foundation they couldn't touch. My independence wasn't a rebellion, it was a necessity, a quiet response to a childhood where affection came with strings. And in that space between control and freedom, I began to discover a strength I would carry for the rest of my life. The air in the living room felt thick the moment I stepped in. Roy was already standing by the dining table, a stack of papers in his hand. Marlene sat stiffly in the chair, arms crossed, eyes cold. Toby was lounging casually on the sofa, smirking as if he knew the show that was about to start. Without a word, Roy slammed the papers down. The thud echoed through the room. I blinked and looked closer. The sheets were filled with numbers. Every meal I had eaten, every outfit I had worn, every school supply I had used. They had even included my allowance from childhood. The calculation was meticulous, as if my life could be reduced to a spreadsheet. I can't believe this, I stammered, trying to grasp what I was seeing. This isn't fair. You're ignoring everything I did on my own, everything I earned and managed by myself. My voice shook, but I tried to make it firm. I had expected shock, maybe even anger, but not this cold calculation of my life. Marlene scoffed, her lips curling in disdain. You think your little efforts matter? We provided everything for you. You should be grateful and pay what you owe. Her words stung more than the bill itself. Gratitude? They had kept score of every favor, every sacrifice, and still claimed it was my responsibility to repay them. I turned to Toby, hoping he might see reason, but he only laughed, a forced, awkward sound. Come on, Lena. Mom and Dad are right. You got plenty. Maybe it's time you realized that, he said, his grin irritatingly smug. The betrayal cut deep, my own brother siding with, ignoring the years I had struggled quietly, the nights I had worked to pay for my own expenses, the way I had avoided burdening. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the mix of hurt and fury rising in my chest. Every word they spoke felt like a deliberate attempt to diminish me, to make me feel small for surviving under their control. The unfairness of it, the blatant disregard for my independence, made the room spin with anger and disbelief. I opened my mouth, trying to argue, to defend myself, but the words faltered. Their eyes were set, unyielding. The moment I realized no reasoning would reach them, I felt a cold clarity. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't let them see how deeply they had wounded me. Without another word, I stood and walked toward the door. My steps were steady, controlled, but inside, emotions swirled like a storm. I could feel tears threatening to spill, but I held them back, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The last thing I saw was Toby's smug face and my parents' scowls, their eyes filled with self-righteousness and entitlement. I closed the door behind me quietly, carrying the rage and betrayal with me. That day, I didn't yell, I didn't fight, but I left with a determination that would never fade. They thought they could shame me, charge me for my life, and control me with numbers. They were wrong. I was leaving, but not defeated. I was already planning how to turn this hurt into strength. Once I stepped into my apartment, the silence hit me like a wave. The familiar walls, the faint smell of coffee, and the soft hum of the refrigerator felt like the only sanctuary I had. I sank onto the couch and let the events of the family meeting replay in my mind, each detail sharper than the last. I remembered the times I had tried to please them as a child. Perfectly folded laundry, carefully completed homework, birthdays celebrated with effort and love, only to have my achievements dismissed or overshadowed by Toby's smallest victory. I thought of the nights I waited for praise that never came, the meals eaten in quiet tension, and the countless moments I felt invisible despite living under the same roof. Humiliation wasn't always loud. Often it was subtle, the sighs, the dismissive gestures, the rolling eyes whenever I tried to explain myself. I recalled the sting of being corrected for speaking up, the way my words were often twisted or ignored, and the sharp contrast of attention lavished on my brother for things that seemed trivial in comparison to my struggles. And then it hit me. They never truly valued me. Roy and Marlene didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a calculation, a commodity to be managed, measured, and charged. The realization burned deep, leaving a hollow ache in my chest, but also a spark that couldn't be extinguished. I had spent so long seeking approval from people who would never offer it freely. I had tried to fit into a system designed to control me, and I had failed, not because I was incapable, but because their love was never meant to nurture me. Anger and sorrow intertwined, forming a tight coil in my chest. But amid the ache, a fierce determination began to grow. I wouldn't let them define my worth. I wouldn't allow their greed and favoritism to shape my life any longer. What they valued, money, control, appearances, was not mine to accept. I could no longer be weighed down by their judgments or their bills. The more I thought about it, the more a plan took shape, not one of confrontation or retaliation through shouting, but through action. I would build a life entirely of my own making, one they could never touch, influence, or diminish. Every choice I made from now on would be for myself, for my independence, and for proving to them, silently, that their attempts to control me would fail. I envisioned a future where their opinion no longer mattered, where success, respect, and fulfillment were mine by merit, not handed or withheld as a form of manipulation. The sense of helplessness began to dissolve, replaced by an energy I had never recognized before, a burning desire to rise, thrive, and demonstrate, without words, that I was unstoppable. Sitting there in the quiet of my apartment, I finally understood something crucial. Revenge didn't have to be loud or confrontational. It could be quiet, patient, and absolute. I didn't need to punish them physically or verbally. I needed to live my life so fully, so independently, that they would be forced to witness the truth. I had outgrown their control, and I would never look back. From that night on, every decision, every late night, every sacrifice I made was fueled by that understanding. I wasn't just surviving. I was planning the life they never imagined I could build. And for the first time, I felt powerful. After that night of clarity, I knew I couldn't rush. Any move I made had to be calculated, deliberate, and invisible to the people who had always underestimated. I started by focusing on my career, searching for opportunities that promised growth and stability, not just a paycheck. I applied myself tirelessly, learning skills my parents never valued, immersing myself in work that challenged me, and refusing shortcuts or compromise. I began making financial choices with purpose. Every paycheck, every bonus, every small investment was carefully considered. I researched stocks, savings plans, and real estate options, quietly building assets that would eventually make me untouchable. I avoided flashy purchases or announcements. Everything was discreet, methodical, a foundation that would later speak louder than any words I could ever say to Roy or Marlene. Distance became my ally. I kept in touch with my family politely, sending occasional messages or attending necessary gatherings, but I never lingered. I smiled, nodded, and made small talk while maintaining a mental barrier between myself and their influence. I refused to let their judgment or expectations shape my decisions. Every interaction was measured, every response cautious. It was exhausting at times, but I understood restraint was a tool in the life I was building. At the same time, I began documenting everything. Not for anyone else's approval. This wasn't revenge yet. It was clarity and motivation for myself. I recorded every instance of manipulation, every instance of favoritism, every time their words left scars. I wrote down the moments when Toby was praised for trivial achievements while I was dismissed, and the countless occasions when financial or emotional control was wielded against me. Reading through these notes fueled a steady, burning determination. Each entry reminded me why I needed to succeed, not to prove them wrong in a confrontation, but to secure my freedom and independence entirely on my own terms. I visualized the life I wanted, a role in a field I respected, recognition for skills and achievements earned honestly, financial freedom that insulated me from their influence, and the quiet satisfaction of autonomy. It wasn't about showing off or making them jealous. It was about building a reality where I no longer needed validation from people who never truly cared for me. Every morning, I approached the day with discipline. I networked with colleagues, learned new strategies, and sought mentors who pushed me forward. I ignored the inner pull to boast or brag, knowing that real strength was in silent growth. Each completed project, each financial milestone, and each new connection brought me closer to a life that would eventually leave my parents' control obsolete. I was patient. I didn't want dramatic confrontations or risky moves. I wanted undeniable results, a life so secure and remarkable that their old ways of measuring worth, through debt, obligation, and favoritism, would mean nothing. Every step was intentional, every decision a quiet act of reclaiming the power they had always tried to wield over me. By the time I allowed myself to imagine the future fully, I realized something powerful. The plan wasn't just about success. It was about rewriting my story, proving to myself that I could thrive independently, and laying the foundation for a life where I alone determined my value. I was no longer their child to manage or measure. I was a woman quietly taking control of her destiny. Months of dedication began to pay off in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. I had worked tirelessly on projects others considered minor, honing skills that would soon set me apart. One afternoon, after submitting a proposal I had refined for weeks, I received the call I had been waiting for, a promotion and a contract that promised not just financial stability, but freedom. The numbers were staggering compared to what I had ever earned before. I was finally untouchable. For the first time, I could breathe without the weight of dependency. No bill from my parents, no expectation of obedience, no judgment could affect me. I had reached a place where every choice was mine, a reality entirely beyond their reach. The satisfaction was intoxicating, but it was paired with something sharper, anticipation. I could feel the possibilities stretching out before me, each one a chance to prove to myself that I had built something lasting. I began to extend support to friends and colleagues quietly, offering advice, guidance, and small opportunities to those around me. None of it was for attention or recognition, and none of it was visible to my parents. Yet, each act reinforced my influence in ways they never could imagine. Doors opened, relationships strengthened, and a subtle reputation took shape, one I had created entirely on my own terms. I realized that real power wasn't about showing off, it was about moving with intention and purpose. Meanwhile, Toby remained the child I had grown up alongside in the shadow of parental control. He relied on Roy and Marlene for guidance, money, and validation, never questioning their judgment. He bragged casually about minor achievements at family dinners, oblivious to the fact that I had quietly surpassed him in every meaningful way. I watched from a distance, part of me amused, part of me satisfied. Their favoritism, once a source of frustration, now served as a reminder of how far I had come. Every evening, as I reflected on my progress, I could feel the gap widening between my life and the tension was subtle but exhilarating. I had achieved independence without confrontation, grown beyond their grasp, and created a reality they couldn't control or diminish. The anticipation of what was to come, the eventual revelation of my success, gave me a quiet thrill. I knew the moment they realized what I had accomplished, it would be undeniable and unforgettable. Even in casual interactions, I noticed the difference in myself. I carried a calm confidence I had never felt before, a sense of authority grounded in competence rather than approval. People began to seek my opinion and trust my judgment naturally, further solidifying the network I had built quietly over time. Each small step added to the foundation of a life that would eventually show my parents that their attempts to control me had failed completely. By the end of that year, I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. Financial security, influence, and independence coalesced into a sense of power I had never known. Every act of quiet generosity, every success earned through effort and skill, fueled a rising anticipation for the moment when my parents would finally see that I was no longer theirs to measure or manipulate. I had arrived and the stage was set. With financial independence secured, I turned my attention to the next step, quiet reclamation. I found a house just a few blocks from my parents' neighborhood, modest from the outside, but strategically located. I purchased it under a different name, ensuring that my presence would remain unnoticed. From that distance, I could observe without exposure, a silent presence influencing the area in ways my parents would never guess. I focused on investments next. For years, Roy and Marlene had mocked certain local businesses, dismissing them as foolish or insignificant. I saw opportunity where they saw failure. I became a silent partner in one such company, providing capital and guidance anonymously. Over time, the business flourished, gaining attention for its innovation and success. My parents, unaware of my involvement, began to admire the venture, praising it to friends and neighbors. The irony was not lost on me. The enterprise they once ridiculed now reflected a subtle echo of my influence. Beyond investments, I began sharing advice and tips anonymously with people in their social circle. A suggestion here, a recommendation there, all strategically placed to elevate others while keeping my identity hidden. I watched from afar as neighbors followed my guidance, securing deals or avoiding mistakes they would have made otherwise. Slowly, I built a reputation that grew in their eyes, yet remained invisible. The sense of control and quiet satisfaction was unlike anything I had experienced before. I had created a network of influence that Roy and Marlene couldn't touch, shaping decisions and outcomes without confrontation or exposure. Every compliment they offered about the neighborhood's improvements, every acknowledgement of smart investments or clever solutions, was unknowingly directed at me. It was a wordless victory, but it felt deeply personal. Toby, as usual, remained oblivious. He continued leaning on their opinions, believing he knew the landscape better than anyone, while I silently orchestrated improvements and progress around them. The disparity between what they perceived and what I had achieved filled me with a quiet, almost mischievous satisfaction. I took care to remain meticulous and patient. Nothing was rushed, and no move was visible. Every investment, every tip, every discreet act of influence was deliberate. I wanted my success to be undeniable, but revealed only when the timing was perfect. I wanted my parents to see not just wealth or accomplishments, but the undeniable proof that their control had been irrelevant all along. Living so close yet unseen offered a unique perspective. I could witness their routines, their conversations about the neighborhood, and their unwitting admiration of my work. Each observation reinforced my sense of independence and validated every choice I had made to keep my distance and focus on long-term gain. This phase of subtle revenge wasn't about confrontation. It was about presence without exposure, about shaping outcomes and proving influence without needing acknowledgement. It was strategic, patient, and entirely satisfying. I had finally found a way to outmaneuver them without anger, without argument, and without revealing my hand. Every success quietly solidified the life I had built, one they had underestimated at every turn. By the time I allowed myself to reflect, I realized how far I had come. They remained unaware of the power that had grown right under their noses. The sense of control, the anticipation, and the silent triumph combined into a satisfaction that no words could capture. I had become untouchable, and they didn't even know it. Years had passed since I quietly built my life, and the time had come for the moment I had long imagined. A formal family gathering was arranged, an elegant dinner celebrating a minor event, but I knew it was the perfect stage. I arrived with composure, dressed simply yet confidently, carrying the quiet power of all I had achieved. No one suspected the transformation that had occurred over the years. As I stepped into the room, all eyes turned. Roy's expression hardened immediately, and Marlene's smile faltered, though she tried to hide it. Toby glanced at me curiously, a hint of smugness lingering, as if he assumed I was still the same girl he had always dismissed. They didn't realize how much had changed. I waited for the moment to speak. Calmly, I addressed the room, letting my presence alone set the tone. "I've been building a life entirely my own," I said steadily, "one that doesn't rely on anyone's approval, control, or expectations. Everything you tried to charge me for, every bill you presented years ago, it didn't matter. I didn't need it, and I've succeeded without it." There was a pause, heavy and almost tangible. Roy's jaw tightened, and Marlene's hands clutched the edge of the table. Toby's eyes widened as the weight of my words settled over him. I could see the realization dawning, the quiet shock that I had surpassed expectations, shattered assumptions, and claimed achievements they had never imagined possible. I calmly outlined a few key milestones: my career advancements, the investments I had quietly made, and the influence I had cultivated within my professional and personal networks. I didn't boast, but I let the facts speak for themselves. The contrast was undeniable. My parents, who had once measured me in debt and obligations, now had no foothold, no argument, no leverage. The numbers on their old bill were meaningless in the light of my reality. Toby's face mirrored disbelief. He had grown up believing he was the favored child, the one destined for recognition and admiration. Yet here I was, standing tall, having quietly surpassed him in financial independence, influence, and personal growth. The room, once a stage for their authority, had shifted entirely. I was the one commanding attention, not because of drama, but because of the undeniable proof of my autonomy. I looked at Roy and Marlene directly, my voice calm yet firm. "You tried to define my worth in dollars and obligations, but I am more than a calculation, more than a favor, more than anything you thought you could control. I never needed you to succeed, and I did." The silence that followed was heavy and complete. My parents couldn't respond. Their previous authority had vanished. Toby didn't speak either. He could only process the quiet devastation of realizing how wrong his assumptions had been. I left the gathering with my dignity intact, every step a reminder of the life I had built without interference or approval. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, and tried to contain me, yet here I was, standing independently and triumphant. My presence alone had rewritten the story of my family, proving that control and expectation could never replace determination and self-reliance. For the first time in that house, I felt complete freedom, not just from their judgments, but from the weight of a past that had once tried to bind me. I had arrived, and nothing they valued could diminish the life I had created. The room was tense, the air thick with expectation as I stepped forward. I had prepared for this moment, not with anger, but with clarity. My voice was steady, every word chosen to convey the truth they had refused to acknowledge for years. "You focused on money and control, as if life could be measured in dollars," I began, glancing at Roy and Marlene. "But the cost of emotional neglect, of constant judgment, of favoritism, is far greater than any amount you think I owed. No bill could capture the loneliness, the fear of never being enough, the quiet moments when I longed for your approval and didn't get it." Their faces stiffened, words caught somewhere behind their teeth. I could see the realization creeping in, the understanding that their greed and obsession with repayment had caused wounds far deeper than they ever noticed. Toby shifted uncomfortably, finally noticing that the sister he had dismissed had endured more than he ever imagined. I continued, calm but cutting. "I built a life from scratch, not to spite you, but because I had no choice if I wanted to survive emotionally. Your attempt to control me, to quantify my existence, failed. I am here because I refuse to be defined by your judgment, your entitlement, your obsession with what you thought you deserved." The silence that followed was complete. No interruption came. My parents could not argue without revealing the truth they had ignored for decades. They were finally facing the reality that their own actions, Their constant measuring, their dismissiveness, their favoritism, had consequences far beyond their awareness. I held their gaze for a moment longer, letting the weight of my words settle. Then I softened my tone, not to apologize, but to reclaim my own peace. I don't carry anger for the sake of revenge. I forgive myself for letting your expectations weigh on me, for letting your judgment shape my early life. But I don't forgive you, not because I hate you, but because I no longer need you to validate me. My life, my choices, my worth are mine alone. Toby's face was pale, his mouth opened slightly, a silent admission of surprise and regret. He had never seen me like this, confident, composed, untouchable in every sense that mattered. He had taken my quiet endurance for granted, never realizing the strength it had required. The sense of vindication that washed over me was profound. Every sleepless night, every quiet struggle, every unnoticed effort had led to this moment. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. I simply articulated the truth with precision and control. This was power grounded in clarity and experience, not ego or pride. I straightened my posture, feeling the finality of the moment. The gathering had become a testament, not to my parents' authority, but to my own resilience. I was no longer a child measured in favors and debts. I was a woman who had survived, thrived, and claimed her place entirely on her own terms. As I stepped back, the room still hushed, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The burden of unacknowledged pain had shifted, and in its place rose empowerment. I had spoken, I had claimed my truth, and I had done so with grace. The consequences of their choices were clear, and I had emerged not just victorious, but free. I stepped out of the house, the familiar weight of their presence replaced by a lightness I had never known. The walls, once filled with judgment and calculation, no longer held any power over me. Roy and Marlene remained inside, frozen in a mixture of shock and disbelief, left alone to confront the consequences of their own choices. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull to explain, defend, or justify myself. Their reckoning was theirs to face. Behind me, Toby lingered at the doorway, hesitation written across his face. He had begun to understand the gaps in his own life, the ways their favoritism and control had limited him, while I quietly advanced beyond reach. The realization seemed to weigh on him, heavy and uncomfortable. But it was too late for regret or reversal. The opportunities one had seized, the independence I had forged, couldn't be taken back. The lesson he needed was evident, yet beyond the point of correction. As I walked down the driveway, the evening light spilling across the street, I felt a profound sense of completion. Every step carried the culmination of years spent building, planning, and persevering. I had navigated the delicate balance of patience and ambition, quietly establishing a life that could never be undermined by their narrow definitions of success. The road ahead was entirely mine, shaped by my choices, guided by my instincts, and fortified by the resilience I had cultivated. I thought of the years I had spent under their scrutiny, the quiet sacrifices I had made, and the moments I had kept to myself to preserve my dignity. Each experience, no matter how painful, had contributed to the strength that now allowed me to walk away without fear. I was untethered, unbound, and fully capable of shaping my own future. In my heart, there was no lingering desire for vengeance. The subtle victories, the life I had built beyond their reach, and the knowledge that I had claimed my worth were enough. Their disapproval, their attempts to control or diminish me, were irrelevant in the face of my independence. I carried with me the certainty that I was in control of my destiny, and that confidence was more valuable than any recognition they could offer. As I reached the corner, I glanced back once. The house looked smaller somehow, ordinary and constrained, unlike the expansive life I had created for myself. I smiled quietly, knowing that the effort, patience, and strategic choices had all paid off. I had emerged whole, unshaken, and triumphant, not through confrontation, but through deliberate, unwavering action. Each day that followed continued the pattern I had established. Work I loved, relationships I nurtured, and achievements I claimed without interference or judgment. The independence I had fought for allowed me to thrive in ways I had never imagined as a child, proving that self-reliance and perseverance were the most powerful forms of vindication. Turning fully forward, I whispered to myself, a private affirmation of all I had accomplished. They tried to charge me for living, but I paid my own way, and in the end, I was richer than they ever imagined. The words carried the weight of closure, empowerment, and a life reclaimed, and I stepped into the future with complete certainty. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from my parents? Or should I have given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.